This episode of the Fried Eggs podcast is brought to you by Temp Drop. Did you know your basal body temperature can help confirm ovulation, tell you where you are at in your cycle, and can even be one of the earliest signs of pregnancy? The annoying part? Actually remembering to track it. The traditional way means taking your temperature with an oral thermometer first thing every morning, at the same time, before you even get out of bed. That's why we love Temp Drop. It's a wearable thermometer that tracks your temperature for you, so you don't have to sacrifice sleep for accurate data. It syncs everything to the app and charts it automatically, making the whole process so much easier. Try it out for yourself and get 10% off with code AFFriedEggs. Okay, well, welcome back to the Fried Eggs podcast. We are so excited. I am so excited to have author Amy Gallo Ryan here today. She's an author and an essayist, a former Condé Nast magazine editor. Her personal essays have appeared in Cosmo, Self, Real Simple, among other publications. And her memoir-in-essays, You May Feel a Bit of Pressure, won the top-selling title release by Unsolicited Press in 2025 and was named a critic's recommendation by Kirkus Reviews. And today she lives in Brooklyn with her family, and we are just thrilled to, one, have this book in the world. It is so important for those of us that know this journey, and also just to have her here to talk about my favorite topic, which is writing, and writing about the things that are hard and making art out of our grief. And so, Amy, thanks for being here today.
I'm truly so excited to be talking to you guys. So thank you for having me.
Yes, of course.
Yay.
Well, we'd love to start by opening up the floor. We don't want to give away too much of the book and your story. We want listeners to definitely become readers and to grab a copy. But if you would like to share about your journey and what this book is about, we'd love to have you share that with listeners.
Yes. So you mentioned when I graduated college, I went to work in women's magazines. So I was a writer and an editor for a long time. And then when I started trying to have a baby, I was working at a website, and the website, it was this interesting experience because the website was a health and wellness and fitness website. And so I was incredibly knowledgeable about all these topics related to health. And that sort of like dovetailed in this strange way because as our trying went on and on and on, I discovered I have infertility, but that it's unexplained. And so it was just this strange kind of tension between all that I knew about the human body and then knowing seemingly nothing about my own body. And, I was very young. We started trying, I was 31. And as 1 year became 2 years, I did Clomid, we did IUIs. Then eventually we were at the point of starting IVF. And I think I turned 33 over the course of that first round. And I really I was in the stage of life where friends were getting married and friends were starting to have babies. And so I really didn't know anybody who had experienced infertility in my own personal world. And it also just felt so crazy to be so young and doing IVF.
Yeah.
But I also was naive enough at that point to just be like, well, if IVF obviously works. So we didn't want it to come to this, but it's come to this. And so now we're going to have a baby. And when that first round failed, the whole experience broadened in this sort of unimaginable way. And at that point, I wound up quitting my job and focusing entirely on treatment, which, I thought I was doing a good thing. But really, I removed myself from the world in this really kind of devastating way. And it went from being, it was such a lonely experience. And then I just basically locked myself in my apartment. The only places I went were the fertility clinic and the acupuncturist and my therapist. And so I wound up making my world very small at a time when I probably could have benefited from making it a little bigger.
It's amazing to me how like all of our stories are so unique, but also I heard so much of myself in that. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, yes, like exactly. That's exactly how I thought. This is exactly what I did, making my world small, staying in my apartment. I saw so much of myself in some of the obsessiveness, the trying to control things,
Yes.
the hopeful delusion where you think like, oh, well, at least, we have to do IVF. Like that's a bummer, but okay, at least we're going to be pregnant by the end of this year then.
Right.
So all of these different thoughts and like hearing them or reading them back to yourself and being like, this could be my journal, but also this is someone else's experience. It's such a powerful testament to what this journey looks like for all of us. And so, yeah, Amy, I'll let you.
Yeah,
Amy,
well,
I'll let you let you go
yeah,
into
well,
the text.
before I go into the next question that we have for you, same, that resonates so much. And you said something that really clocked with me. Like we think we're doing the right thing,
Yeah.
and I feel like Katie, we just had this chat where we were like, well, it's okay to like put all this stuff on the back burner, and like we have to prioritize and all of this. But I've never heard it said that way, and it really just shocked me a little bit. Of like, well, what are the other things that like were actually holding us together that now we've lost sight of or like lost connection to? How did you figure that out? Or was it later that you figured that out? Or is it as you were going, you were like, oh, I need to change something here?
I didn't start writing until after I had concluded treatment.
Okay.
Okay.
And I found that writing allowed me, of course, to process, but it also, I think so much of the experience of infertility involves feeling powerless. And I felt like writing put the story back in my hands and gave me this sort of control that I had been desperate for so long. I may not have had control over what happened in the living of it, but I had control in the telling of it. And so I think like the writing forced me to just examine, just take this like, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah.
And sort of like piece it together, make sense of it, find meaning in it, because it felt so amorphous, But no, as I was living it, and I thought like, I'm nailing this. I mean, I sure wasn't, but I was like, I'm taking things into my own hands, and I'm going to walk away from this job, and I'm going to dedicate myself to this pursuit with absolutely everything I have. And that's what I felt moved to do. It felt like the right thing for me to do. But now my perspective on it is different. But I didn't know how to do anything else. And I remember, as infertility went from a slice of my life, and then that amount that it occupied of my life just slowly crept more and more and more into the main frame. I never really figured out how to have like one foot in the real world and one foot in the infertility world. So for me, I was like, I'm just stepping out of the real world altogether because I don't know how to do this any other way. But then I sort of allowed it to consume me and my whole life.
Well, and how you wrote about it is something like, I think there's such an intimate and, Katie talked about like beautiful crafted narrative of how you kind of worked through all of this. And at what point, I guess, as you were writing, what I'm curious about is, did you start writing just to like kind of process and like let it out? Or at what point did you realize like, oh no, this needs to be, I need to actually put this into a book, and like this needs to have a telling, right?
All along, I was like, my experience is not extraordinary in any way. And I think I had like, it was absolutely horrible in the way that infertility is absolutely horrible for all of us. And I think I had this idea that like, to tell it as a story and as a book, or, it's something really exceptional needs to define your experience. And I was kind of like, this is just what it is. And then I wound up having our 4th round of IVF. I had an ectopic pregnancy and had an emergency surgery. And then a few weeks later, I had like a complication from that surgery and had to have a second emergency surgery and had all this internal bleeding. And that was the point where I was like, this is insane. Like this, like this is really insane what we like go through. I'm just trying to have a baby. So that was that was the moment where I was like, oh, like this seems kind of nuts. That's where it sort of started to occur to me that maybe there was something to tell. It is an ordinary woman's story, like the sort of like commonality that it encompasses. I'm an ordinary person who lived infertility the way we all do. And so like the thing itself isn't like radical, but I think like being really deeply honest about what that actually means and looks like and feels like is maybe the radical part of it, if that makes sense. And it's interesting, like people that have read it that have not experienced infertility are like, oh my God, I can't believe how much you went through. And then people who have experienced infertility are like, I felt so seen. I related to so much. This is, and I'm like, right. Like, and I think that's so interesting that like all of us that are like your podcast, anyone who is like engaging in this conversation, I think we're all trying to like build a language that doesn't exist for this experience and what it really truly means. Like, I think there's like a robust surface level conversation. Like it's normalized that many people have trouble conceiving and that many kids are born through assisted reproductive technology. And like, we're all very like comfortable with that idea, but like underneath that, all the layers of what that really means and looks like is all like unexplored terrain that we're all sort of trying to contribute in some way to like giving words to what this really is.
There's a moment in the book where you talk about wanting to take a pregnancy test by yourself and feeling like even that experience is stolen from you. This experience of getting to find out if I'm pregnant by myself, to only know like me and the baby, like we are the only ones that know. And as soon as everything becomes clinical, then there are multiple people involved in learning whether or not it worked. And I think it's really interesting what you're talking about with how all of this just happens to us. Like we try to control it. We try to control the outcome or what is happening to us. But I think if all of us are really being honest with ourselves, like there is no control when it comes to infertility and fertility treatments. Like you just are at the mercy of how the journey goes. And then you mentioned earlier that with writing, you got to control that because you're telling your story. And maybe you can speak to that a little bit for listeners who, I think that's kind of what we're doing with the podcast. And like I had this epiphany as you were saying that. And for other listeners who might be writers or painters or musicians or really just like it doesn't have to be like your strict like art medium, but any way that you're telling your story, how that really is a reclamation and like what kind of healing did you experience in being able to finally do something on your own terms and tell the story in the way that you wanted to after so much and so many years of just like not having control.
So after we concluded treatment, I think I had this idea of like, okay, now I'm just going to re-enter the world that I left behind to live in my little bunker alone. And I immediately like took a freelance magazine job and just went back to what I had been living before. And it just very quickly became clear that I was not the same person. I could not go back to who I was, what I was doing. It didn't make sense anymore. Like, it's been a very fascinating thing to experience the way I have not been able to leave it behind. It was not like treatment is over and we're just going to close that box and off I go. Like, that was 10 years ago. I haven't wanted to let it go. I haven't been able to let it go. This book has allowed me to sort of like keep my experience in the present tense in a way in my life. And I sort of started to have this like, my God, my book's coming out. Does that mean I have to finally let it go? Like, is that what this is? And there's this like sadness, and also like unwillingness. Like I'm like, as I've started to work on new writing, infertility still fits into it. The experience, it's ongoing. I don't know. Like, it's just like, it's part of my identity in a way that I don't fully understand. But at each turn, I think I have expected myself to be like, okay, now we're closing that chapter, and now that is done. And I'm just like, no, I'm like, what is that? But it's interesting, like, as I've begun to meet people in the infertility community, I have observed that in other people. Like, I have women that are like, I'm 27 years out of my treatment and I'm still here. I'm still advocating. I'm still working in this space. Like, so there is something broad, it's a broader thing. But I would love to like understand what that is. It like gets its claws in you and you're just like,
it makes me think what you were saying like earlier about, you think that you need some big, humongous thing to write this story. And then you realize like over time, it's like to me, it sounded like this long, unrelenting journey is the big thing. Right. And it's kind of like a realization that once you move on from one stage to the next, it's just like you're supposed to leave that behind. And like, how possibly can you do that? And you can't. And then you feel like guilty about not doing that. But it is a life-changing experience in a way that makes me think like the way that we sort of diminish reproductive health and fertility in general is like, it just should happen for everybody. Right. And it's like a normal thing that everybody goes through and you just have babies and it's totally normal and it just works for everybody. Right. And then we realize like, no, we are just not talking about the things that actually plague people and what experiences people actually go through. These things are so monumental to us, but we're just like, we hide them or they get pushed down because they're not a part of the conversation and not recognized in the same way. Like it made me think about like, any other type of major diagnosis would be more understood. Like, of course, you take that for the rest of your life and now you're advocating for it. And now you're looking for better ways to improve the system or ways to improve living life with this thing. But with infertility, it's like, oh, you got an ending. So like, aren't you done with that yet? It's over. Go be a mom now or go be, just go back to your regular life. And I wanted to ask like two things real quick before we get further into it. Like when you say concluding treatment, help us understand like what is the conclusion that you felt like that was the time where sort of society or like the world was that would have been the time that you should move on, right? And then it wasn't so, just I think for clarity for people.
So my infertility was unexplained and we were being told that genetically tested embryos were like the thing that was our promised land. So by the time we had genetically tested embryos, it was our 5th round of IVF and we had 4 genetically tested embryos. We put in the strongest and the weakest. And at that point it was like, are we going to have 1 baby or are we going to have 2 babies? And it did not work. And that was like this major inflection point of this really might not ever be. And the way we have understood it is not the way it is. And nobody could explain why 2 genetically tested embryos couldn't become a baby. And so that was the point where we sort of recalibrated and kind of tried to determine how much more can we do. And we got a dog who's sitting next to me right now. And then we did a 6th round with our last 2 genetically tested embryos. And one of them took. So that felt like, oh, okay, we have concluded this chapter.
Right. That should be your happy ending. It should be done now. Right.
And I'm sure some people are very willing to close the door and not look back. And that just wasn't it for me.
When you talked about trying to get back into this normal life and you just like enter the world again, and then it just didn't make sense for you. Can you clock what didn't make sense? What felt just at odds or in friction with the experience that you had?
Yeah.
Yeah. And your new perspective.
So, I returned to this sort of writing things about lipstick and mascara and sweaters, but I love all of those things. But I was just sort of like, I am unable to use my time for something that doesn't really matter. And the shift in just my priorities, what I cared about, the way I saw the world, infertility was just the most profoundly lonely time of my life. I just felt like being in those spaces, in the clinics, and seeing how many people were there. I live in Brooklyn, New York. So, my clinics were in Manhattan and they were just overflowing. And we all put our heads down and didn't look each other in the eye. So it's like, on one hand, I understood that I was most definitely not alone because I could see all of these other women, but we couldn't connect to each other, even like in the very small space where we would go right before a retrieval. It was sort of, you're almost like your knees were practically bumping up against each other in this very tiny space. And like, maybe you would throw a smile. Like, it was like this like the silence, even among the only people who really understood, felt like maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Part of me just felt this real pull to like make some sense of what that was and how exactly it rearranged me,
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for getting into that a little bit more. It's frankly helpful to hear it articulated because I think we were both feeling a similar sense in different ways. And I totally know what you mean about like being in the waiting room. No one's looking at each other. We're all just like getting so small too. Like and part of it is like, it's early, I'm tired. I haven't had my coffee yet, but there is something else going on there where it's like, I just want to hide from this. I want to get, hunker down, get through it, get out. And then you realize the whole experience is that then you're quote unquote out, but you can't actually be out. You can never be like away from this whole thing. Or maybe some people can, but
no,
I don't think Katie or I have felt like we've gotten there either.
I think whatever outcome any of us have, if you spent any period of your life facing like the existential question of, am I going to get to have children? Living with like the pain of that question for whatever amount of time, I think changes your life. And I would imagine in many cases changes you as a person in ways that I don't think culturally like we yet fully understand. But like, how could it not, Yeah,
it changes your brain chemistry. A quick break for our episode sponsor, Tempdrop. When I first started trying to get pregnant, I would manually track my basal body temperature, like with an actual oral thermometer. And I would have to set an alarm the exact same time every morning just to take my temperature before getting out of bed. Honestly, if I could go back, I would 100% use a wearable thermometer like Tempdrop because it tracks your temperature for you, so you don't have to sacrifice sleep or stress when you forget a day of charting, which I definitely did more than once. I also love how the wearable syncs everything to the app and charts it automatically, so I can actually see patterns without having to do all the work myself. This would have been a dream when I was in the thick of infertility and already had a million appointments and supplements to remember. Listeners, don't make the same mistake I did. Try Tempdrop and use code AFFriedEggs for 10% off. Well, I want to transition into a couple of fun for me. I don't know if it's
fun for everyone.
Fun for everyone. Craft questions just about the decisions you made in writing this book. So one thing that really surprised me is that it is not chronological. You actually bounce around quite a bit. And so we learn a lot about your journey and some of the things that happen much later in your journey very early on in the book, which I think is a really wonderful surprise to kind of get that information up front. But it's, maybe different than what some people expect of like, oh, we're going to meet Amy at the very beginning of her journey and we won't really find out what happens until later on. But you do bounce around a lot into earlier years of your life and then into treatment. So I'm really curious about that decision and why you made that decision for the readers, but also from a writing perspective. And then the second part to that question is like, you're very intentional about wanting to end the book and write the book in a very present place, which is something that Amy and I talk a lot about on the podcast of wanting to like really keep this in the messy middle, because I think there are so many stories out there where it's like, well, this is what happened to me, but here's how it ended. And so here's like the hope that you can cling to, and you're very intentional not to do that. And so I'm curious about those decisions that you made when writing this.
Well, I think it's also funny that you grouped them together because I think both choices came from the same place. I wanted to structure my book through the lens of the emotions of the experience, because I felt like even the three of us here, whatever the differences in our diagnoses or any other number of the other aspects of our treatment, we probably have all experienced the same hope and disappointment and uncertainty. And I felt like we share more than our diagnoses or whatever would have us believe. And I felt like so many books that sort of led with a diagnosis or an outcome, like if you don't necessarily see yourself in either of those things, then immediately that story feels like it's not for you. I was so desperate for connection. And to me, that felt like, I know that all these other women are feeling shades of the same things or experiencing similar moments at the baby showers and the whatevers. Like that felt important to me. And then once I knew I was going to organize it by emotions, it sort of necessitated not being linear. And actually, like in early days, I was like, what if you just don't have to read it cover to cover? You can just pick it up and enter at any point, depending on where you are in your experience. And then people who know more about books than me were like, people don't read books that way. And I was talked out of it. So there's a lot of jumping, but I think it's in service to a goal of connection through the lens of emotions. And then same with outcome. Like I think I sort of said it before, but like, I think the crux, like the heart of the challenge of infertility is facing down this question of, am I going to get to have children?
Yeah.
And if you sit in that uncertainty, no matter where this whole thing spits you out, if you sit in that uncertainty for any period of time, there's a lot of complexity and nuance and pain. And there's just a very complicated story there that I think is worthy of telling apart from outcome. And I think that the reality is that none of us know. Like when you're living the hope and the despair and the shame and the grief, like you have no idea which way your ending is going to take you. And so you're having to confront those same feelings. And I think that that's a powerful thing to experience in and of itself. I felt like that was important.
Well, it works beautifully. I think it's a refreshing way to interact with a story like this. And I think it's something that maybe somebody who hasn't experienced this might be a little bit more surprised by, or like, I want we had an author on earlier or I guess it was last year now, Jared Walker. He wrote The Empty Nest, which is it's a children's book, but for adults, about the experience of infertility, specifically from the male perspective and watching his wife go through it. And at the very ending, like it talks about that of like, you probably wanted a conclusion to this, but there isn't a conclusion because that's how infertility is. Like it's messy. There isn't this arc moment that happens for everyone where all of a sudden, and then it worked out and the skies opened and everything became beautiful and purposeful. And for people who know that so well, getting to see that reflected in the way that you've structured this, I think is a really meaningful choice. And we both wanted to talk to you about the title because I know from like the book publishing world that often the title that you want does not end up being the title because marketing teams and everyone is like, no, like we need to do this instead. So this is such a good title. And I want to know if this was the original title. I'm so like, I remember seeing it. One of my friends who's an author, Amy's met her too, Taylor Hahn. She posted, I think she got an early copy and she posted it on her stories. And I was like, oh my gosh, that title, like what? Like this is incredible. So we want to hear the story about the title.
So it's funny, like before I had like shared the title, I was sort of like, is this going to land? It wasn't a given to me. And then I feel like women, it's like the secret society. That's a phrase that we all know. But you experience it alone in a small room and it's not discussed or shared. And then it's like this sort of like, I see you, and there's something like very wonderful about that. And like women in their 70s are like, love the title. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so, it's like the universality of like the female experience, I think, it's a cool secret little thing. No, so I mean, it took me 10 years to publish this book. So I feel like I have been like chewed up and spit out by the publishing industry. And it was originally on submission with a different title, Trying, which there actually is a book out now called Trying. And then over the course of many years where I hadn't found a publisher, but I had gotten enough, I had heard enough to feel like there's something here and I'm going to keep working at it until I get there. And I got some feedback to add more humor. It was a little too heavy. So I did like a somewhat substantial revise. After I revised, I felt like it needed a new title to sort of like speak to like less somber material. And so it's actually funny because it's so rare that you can like capture the moment of a brainstorm, but I was brainstorming with my friend over text messages. So I have like the text messages, the back and forth of like ideating. And she was like, I love titles that are phrases. And she's like, is there anything that like doctors say or that's on the forms that like, and I just wrote, you may feel a bit of pressure with like 1,000 exclamation points. And
yeah,
it was like,
there it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yes.
Incredible.
Yes. But then when I signed the contract with the publisher, it said like they have final say over title. And so I was just like, I'm handing this to you. Like, please. Like,
yes.
Yeah. So,
Well, it goes back to your point about connection. Ultimately, like it is such a connecting point, and immediately, like you know exactly the moments you're talking about. And you feel seen, like, okay, you're going to take care of me in this book. You're going to talk about it, all the stuff in a really honest way. You're not going to sugarcoat it. Like we're on this. You see me. Yeah, we're on the same footing. You see me. You're not going to just gloss over everything. Give me, again, back to like this happy ending, where it's all going to work out. It goes back to this like really honest connection point. And it's such immediately Katie and I both have had the same reaction to it. I wanted to ask you.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, please.
You go to the OBGYN and
they still say it.
They still say it, and every time.
Oh yeah. You're like, that's a book now. Let me like.
Let me just leave that in the lobby for you.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, and the fact that it just brings up so many things for me. The male doctors, the female doctors, the ultrasound techs, like.
Well, you've had so many procedures, so you've I can't imagine how many times you've heard.
You felt a lot of pressure, and then you're like, that's what you call pressure? I have different words for that. I think
it's
we have different
catch-all.
synonyms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. This is the PG rated word for
Right.
what we're all experiencing. It's not what I would call pressure. Question for you about, so like when you got that feedback to inject some humor into it, or lighten it up a little bit, did you feel like when you first wrote it that just wasn't there for you, but maybe with like some more time you were able to see that? Or was there a reason it was more maybe raw and a bit darker, which also resonates, frankly? Some of my writing is, which I don't share really, but is like very, it's hard for me to go back to, because it's all kind of a jumbled mess of like intertwined. It looks like the upside down kind of, and that's kind of what it looks like to me. So how did you come back to it? Was it like some clarity all of a sudden, or you had to dig a little to be like, yeah, if you don't laugh, you're going to cry, and we need some combination of the two? Or how did you get to revisions like that?
I mean, I think you're exactly right. Like the version of it I wrote initially had a lot less humor because it's just not there, like it was like a profoundly painful time. And again, it was like 13 years ago. So like people like you guys were not doing a podcast at that time. And so when you get to talk about it with people, you can maybe find more levity, or just sort of like, but that wasn't part of my experience. I wasn't talking about it. It was all buried inside. And I think the cultural conversation has also like expanded a lot in the ensuing years. So yes, it was there was no humor to be found. But then by the time I got that note, I had enough emotional distance. I had sort of like written the darkness as I felt it and lived it, and sort of said what I wanted to say, and released a little bit of that. And then I think it was easier to do that as an overlayer, as opposed to, it was not a natural, like,
right. Yeah.
I could talk about this forever. Okay. So as we wrap up here, first of all, everyone go order a copy. Can you tell everyone where they can find more of your work, what you are working on now? And then we would love, if you're willing, to have you read a little bit from the book as a way to conclude the episode.
Yes, my website is amygalloryan.com, and my book is available wherever books are sold, and I'm on Instagram. And yes, I've been doing some new writing, and it's torturous. Like I think also like I wrote the bulk of this long enough ago that like I've lived with a more polished version of it, even as I was still making changes. Like the actual just blank page, staring back at you, like that moment, I'm a little bit removed from, and it is so brutal.
Yeah.
Sharing it and being like, is this anything? Does anyone, so I'm like wading through my own like writerly angst, trying to like, work on some new stuff.
See, Katie, even when you publish, it's still there.
I know.
So I think it's the universal feeling, it sounds like.
I'm like, that like brutal awakening is like, I'm living in real time. I'm like, oh my God, I think this is just forever. Like it's the creative process is like maybe just a torturous life sentence.
Always. Yes.
So happy to be living through that with
yes.
both of you.
Yeah. Incredible. Well, everyone, we will say goodbye now and finish with having Amy read some of her book. But please pick up a copy. And Amy, thank you again for joining us today.
I loved chatting with you guys. Thank you.
Yes.
And so I'm going to read this section. I mentioned it before. After our 5th round of IVF failed, because our infertility was unexplained. We just had never had anything to point to. And then once the genetically tested embryos failed to become a baby, I was like, wow, it's my body that is the reason for this. And so I sort of internalized that really deeply. And so this part is about telling Tim. The moment came over Memorial Day weekend. Our 6th round of IVF was underway, but we had another week or so until the transfer. With permission to free ourselves from the tether of morning monitoring, we escaped to a tiny ramshackle cottage in the woods a few hours from New York City. We did very little over those few days, cooked dinner on the grill, sat by the glowing gas fireplace in the evenings as Maple rolled around the floor. I remember standing in the rusty, crumbling bathroom, pressing slime-filled whitening trays against my teeth. I had put off the chore month after month for years now, not wanting to slather my mouth in chemicals when I was trying to grow a healthy baby. But now, why the fuck not? I was only doing shots to prepare my body for the transfer. There was no embryo inside me yet. And realistically, it looked extremely unlikely that I would ever be pregnant anyway. May as well chug some bleach. Later that afternoon, Tim and I were having a beer on the back deck, watching Maple run around the yard, nibbling grass, chasing bugs. We could hear the trickle of water easing over rocks and sticks from the creek down below. But beyond that, the air was empty, daring me to speak. Flies were swirling through slanted sunlight, and with my stomach twisted, my gums on fire, I inhaled deeply and started talking. I told Tim I was sorry that I wasn't able to make him a father, that I was sorry for letting him down. I told him how deeply it weighed on me, how gravely I felt it to be disappointing him like this. I told him he should be a father, he had every right to be, and how exceptionally well it would suit him. We married knowing we both wanted a family together. I knew this was not the life he signed up for. There was also something I didn't say. My voice couldn't quite get there. That if he wanted to try to pursue that life with someone else, he should do it. Being a father was what he wanted, what he deserved. He should have it. I was too scared to say that part out loud, but I tried to say all the words around it, to hint that I would give him an out in case he needed one. When I was finished, the sound of the creek returned. It was still there. I was still there. I felt myself in a kind of kinetic midair suspension, like a car that has rocketed off a cliff. After a pause, Tim, who had been staring at me, started talking. He had no idea I felt such a burden of responsibility, he said, but it was not my fault, not at all. He did not feel let down by me. This was our problem. We were in it together. His words were everything I could have hoped to hear. Reassuring, supportive, loving. I was grateful. I felt relief. As I came down from the heart-pounding sensation of heavy words released, we sat there in shaded silence on the porch, afternoon sun drenching the yard. I don't think we ever hugged. It wasn't like that. He might have grabbed my hand. We might have locked eyes, soundlessly acknowledging my exposed vulnerability, our shared sorrow. I might have tried to pull my face into the approximation of a smile, but the closed mouth kind, lips stitched together, as I did in most pictures from around this time. Burning white teeth inside that no one ever got to see.
It's beautiful. Oh,
yeah. There are parts of this that, like, while reading, I had to, like, stop. So, just because it just, like, it comes back in waves, you know? And so, yeah, just really thank you for writing this.
Thank you guys so much for having me. And I've really been looking forward to the conversation. And I'm so happy.
Same.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
This
guys.
is such a pleasure.